Okay, so today we are going to start on our next unit, which is the Roaring Twenties. So the 1920s, which was this time when it seemed like everything was going great. People were partying, they were drinking, even though it was illegal because of prohibition. But everything seemed like it was going great. It was this time of huge social change. That is what we're going to talk about today. So after the war, the US economy began to boom, businesses grew, and people had money to spend. Before the war, it was kind of like you spent money on food and things for your house. You didn't go out shopping, really. So the 1920s, it had three different nicknames. It was called the Roaring Twenties, the Jazz Age, because jazz music came about during this time, and the Lawless Decade, because there was a lot of organized crime during this decade. So, like I said, after the war, Americans became consumers, spending money instead of saving. They started to buy cars, which were a lot more affordable. They started to get electricity in their homes. They bought appliances like toasters and refrigerators and radios. So they had excess money and they started to spend that money on stuff. Before the war, and in like the late 1800s, you really spent money on necessities. But when they have this excess money, they can go out shopping. They can buy fancy dresses or nice suits. So they become consumers. They are spending money like we are today. Well, not really, because the stores are closed. And I haven't shopped in a very long time, and I'm going through withdrawals. I just wanted to let y'all know. Okay, so you had cars looking like this. This is a Ford car. And they became a lot more affordable. Now, when you would get a car and you would get your license, you wouldn't get a paper license like you do today, or not really paper, but a card. Instead, you got metal. Yeah, you got a metal little token, and that was your license. It's like a small, like, how does this work? Okay. Okay, like this size. You got like a small little metal token, and that was your driver's license. And you didn't have to be 16 or 15 to get it. You could just go sign up for it, get it, drive away. So I know someone and their granddad got their license when, obviously this person is a little older now, but their granddad, when he was alive in the 1930s, he got his license when he was 13. So y'all could be driving now. It would be scary. So during this time, there was also new forms of entertainment. You had blues and jazz music coming about. This is when you have flappers, so girls start wearing dresses that show off their ankles and their knees, which I know, getting a little crazy here. They cut their hair really short. And dancers dressed like this are called flappers, because their dresses flap all around. And one of the more popular dances actually that came about during this time was the Charleston, which was actually named from Charleston, South Carolina. So later I'm going to actually show y'all the Charleston dance. I mean, a video of it, not me doing it. So these are two pictures from the Roaring Twenties. And this is a huge difference than what it would have been like in like the 1870s, where people are wearing these long skirts. Like you have to be completely covered. You cannot show your ankles because that is so improper. Like here they're showing off their shoulders and their knees. Crazy. So people started to listen to jazz music on the radio, but they also started to listen to stories on the radio too. So maybe like every day at 4 o'clock, you might have a story that comes on the radio, and they might, the radio announcers might go over that story for about or tell the story for about 30 minutes, and the next day they would continue on and start the story again. And they'd have little things in the background to make noises. You also had silent films that were really big and were coming out during this time. Baseball and boxing also became really popular, and people would spend money to go to baseball games and to see people box. Now, 1920s is also known for Prohibition, which is the 18th Amendment. It outlawed the sale of alcohol because people would go around with signs like this saying, alcohol is poison and vote yes on prohibition, because they didn't want you to turn into people like this. Drunks, homeless looking drunks. But it was also just kind of a way to control other people too. And it was a complete failure. So even though the sale of alcohol was forbidden, people found ways around this all the time. People started making moonshine, and they started going to speakeasies. And a speakeasy is an underground club that sells alcohol. These were everywhere. So if any of y'all end up ever watching the newer Great Gatsby movie, it has speakeasies in it. And these speakeasies, they could be in the back of stores, they could be in basements. You might have like passwords. You'd have to like knock on the door and say a password to be let in. You might have to know someone. And the passwords, they might change like every week just to make sure cops don't really figure out what's going on. So even though prohibition was a thing, people still found ways around that, and they bought alcohol anyway. Now, this right here, this is actually, or it was a speakeasy in Savannah, Georgia. So it was a grocery store during the 1920s called Gherkin's Family Grocery. And today it's actually a restaurant you can go to called the Crystal Beer Parlor in Savannah. But it used to be a speakeasy. So people would go in the grocery store, there would be a door in the back they'd knock on, and they'd be let into the underground club. So when these speakeasies were found, cops, they would just dump out all the alcohol like you see in these pictures here. So people had to get really creative, and they had to find new ways to get away from the cops quickly or to hide alcohol. So these are some of the ways that people hid alcohol. So they would hide it in this right here. It's a pretzel, or it looks like a pretzel. They would hide it in these fake eggs. They would hide it in this fake chicken breast. In a cane, this is a book that they would hide it in. So they would try and find all these new things to hide alcohol in. So right here, you can see a little close up. You have the pretzel right here. All of these were used to hide alcohol. This picture right here, it shows a woman. She's even hiding a flask under her skirt right here. Now, one of the things that came about because of Prohibition was NASCAR. Now, obviously, they didn't have NASCAR starting in the 1920s, but people started trying to make their cars go faster so they could outrun the police. And this eventually leads into NASCAR decades down the road. But it all started because of Prohibition, because people were trying to figure out ways to make their cars go faster. Now, Prohibition also led to an increase in crime and corruption. And this is when we start getting our first gangsters, not like the gangs we have today, and organized crime. And there's also an increase in the KKK during this time as well. Now, one of the biggest gangsters, one of the biggest mobsters around during this time was Al Capone, who's in the bottom pictures. And if you look right here, you can see he's got a little scar on his face. So his nickname became Scarface. Al Capone was a gangster in Chicago. He was one of the biggest ones. And all of these gangsters came about because they started selling alcohol illegally. So Prohibition really gave them a platform to stand on. It allowed them to open up their own businesses of making moonshine and selling alcohol illegally. Now, Al Capone, he did do some decent stuff for Chicago. Like, he opened up food kitchens and everything. He was not a good guy. His arch enemy was Bugs Moran. Just look right there. Your teacher looks so cool right there. Do you see that, guys? Y'all really lucked out with me. Anywho, so Al Capone, his arch nemesis was Bugs Moran, who was also a gangster involved in selling alcohol. And this all came to a head on St. Valentine's Day. So this is called the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And this newspaper says, 7 Chicago gangsters slain by firing squad of rivals, some in police uniforms. So what happened? Well, some of Bugs Moran's men were in their workshop, and these police came in and said, oh, we're raiding y'all. Like, we know y'all are committing crimes. We're going to arrest y'all. So they line all 7 men up against this wall right here. And then they take their Tommy guns and they go. They gunned them down. I think there were like 70 rounds, 70 bullets fired to kill these 7 men. Now, it was pretty well known that it was Al Capone's men who did this. They dressed as police officers. They came in, lined up the men, shot them all, and then fled. But they could never prove that it was Al Capone's men. So Al Capone technically got away with it. So this one says, massacre of 7 of the Morgan gang. Victims are lined against the wall. 1 volley kills all. And then up here it says, killing scene too gruesome for onlookers. So the picture I showed you, that was a picture of the actual bodies. They took pictures and published them in newspapers, and people were like, oh my gosh, this is awful. And so people kind of started to turn against Al Capone after this. He did end up going to prison for tax evasion eventually, and then he died in 1947. So, yep. And we will stop here with the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. So we're ending on a positive note, obviously. Okay, we will finish the 1920s. Is it Friday or Monday? I don't know. We'll finish the 1920s one of those days. So I will see y'all later.